Straus, author of Onelegged Mongoose. He is the author of 4 poetry collections, the recipient of numerous awards, including the Robert Penn Warren Award in Humanities from Yale. His poems have appeared in most of the leading literary journals in the US, and he's an oncologist and former chairman of oncology and professor of medicine. He has authored some 100 scientific papers and edited 3 textbooks on lung cancer. He's a recipient of Boston's Young Leader Award, previously given to John F. Kennedy. Marc and his wife Livia have been avid collectors of contemporary art, focusing on new discoveries. Their collection has now had 11 museum exhibits, and they're listed among the top collectors in the US. Marc lectures worldwide on building an art collection and has written nearly 50 articles on art. In 2004, Marc and Livia founded Hudson Valley MoCA, a public museum in Peekskill, New York, 1 hour north of New York City. In 2011, Marc opened an art gallery on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and represents 24 artists from 16 countries and is among the leading galleries today. And I had a chance to look at some of the artists, and they're really amazing. So I think we're going to start with you reading from your book. Yes?
Yeah, I'll see if I need this. I'm not sure. Well, Adam and Jessica, thanks for having me down. Livy and I just dodged an ice storm in New York, and now I know why people move here. It's getting tougher there. Onelegged Mongoose was an unusual piece of work for me. It's a memoir of just 2 years in my life, the years I was just turned 10, and it concludes just after I turned 12. And it's narrated by the kid I was then. So we only know what I could tell you when I was in that moment. And it opens up with, my dad was an immigrant who came from the Ukraine when he was 15. He was totally impoverished. And the year I was born, he opened a textile store on the Lower East Side where I started working when I was age 5 and loved it. But he made a little money, and he did what a lot of people did then. He bought a little house in the suburbs. So we moved out to West Hempstead, Long Island, and he went to work. It was an awful place for a kid. We were among the very, very few Jews there, and it was extraordinarily anti-Semitic then. It's changed a lot now. And I had an older sister, a younger brother, Stephen, who was 3 years younger, who was really a skinny little thing. He was a very frightened but bright boy, and he was a magnet for bullies, and I became a street fighter, and really quite good at it. And the book opens up when my dad announces, I'm taking Stephen to a religious yeshiva in September, and we're going to commute 4 hours a day. And we weren't religious, and like, this made absolutely no sense to me. But we went, and I entered a very foreign world. And, you know, really some interesting things happen. I'm going to read from 2 small chapters because this was so different. And this is early in the book. Can you all hear me? Okay, this is early in the book. And it's called Green Pea. And I'm now in the yeshiva of Central Queens for a couple of months, where I was in 5th grade in English. They started me in 1st grade in Hebrew because I didn't know anything. But in a couple of months, I entered the Talmud class, which was almost 4 hours a day in Aramaic. I mean, it was really a different world. Green Pea. The gray paint has mostly flaked off the long, narrow wooden bench, and freshly incised on its middle surface In large block letters are the initials J.K. Who is he? Perhaps it is Jonathan Kaufman or Jason Kravitz in 6th grade, the lowly coward hiding his identity. In any event, the old bench will be painted soon enough. I detest cowards, and that's why I'm in the locker room, because I will have a fight with Robert Greenberg. I can't ever recall a time without fights. Now 6 weeks in the school and not a fight. No word that anyone picked on Stephen. I know a part of me misses it, the thrill that ignites in every bone, muscle, and nerve. When my fist meets someone's face, a current snaps on. My hands are blurs, punching left, right, left. Even if I get hit, it will do no good. I won't feel it. You have no chance with someone like me. No chance. Lately, I've been cutting more classes and playing handball at the schoolyard near the annex. But handball never has the exhilaration of fighting. Nothing does. So today is my day for a fight, and Greenberg deserves what's coming. He goes into the boys' locker room and I follow. No one else is there. A large, dank cement room behind the basketball court with 2 rows of back-to-back rusted metal lockers and 2 wooden benches in front, a room that stinks worse than the rat-infested wharf streets in David Copperfield. Here the odors are rooted and permanent and worsen with each sweated t-shirt and reused sock, each boy dripping and coughing and peeing in the long yellow-stained porcelain urinal in the next room. Everything reeks horribly and contradicts the idea that real athletes use this room, and so does the fact that the gym outside only has 1 torn basketball loop. The girls' Jason locker room is similar to the boys, except for the stand-up urinals. I know because I sneaked inside once. They have 5 metal stalls, and everything is a bit neater. I can picture the girls coming in to change, especially the 8th graders, especially Sandra Feldman, whose boobs are mountainous and soft. But back to Greenberg. He's almost 6 inches taller than me, though about the same weight. He is stringy with thin arms and legs. His hair is shoe-polished black. He has black eyes and a skinny face. In fairness, he is good-looking except for the acne on his face and neck. There's nothing athletic about Robert, but then there's nothing athletic about most of the boys here. Some play chess. A few play at basketball, which is hilarious. None play football. I don't think I'm a particularly good athlete. I barely made first string on the Little League team, but I'm good at fighting. What they do well here is verbal combat. They can argue you under a table. They can rank you out in cold blood and turn your position upside down. They are as competitive as any kids I ever met, but all with talk. They learn that in Talmud class and at home. Their parents say one thing and mean something else. One has an opinion about President Eisenhower and the other disagrees. They are jousting like the Knights of the Round Table, but with words rather than long pointed sticks. On Grand Street, where Dad's store is, Jews have a way of mocking each other. They debate about everything, and usually it is all in jest. Greenberg is the best among us. With his high-pitched nasal voice, he has wounded half the kids in class. Sometimes he cuts them down with word cleavers. He's not a very good student, but at verbal combat, he is unequal. This was okay until he made the grave error of aiming his insults at me. He mocked me repeatedly in the first weeks of class. My clothing, my red hair, my Long Island accent, my haircut, always in front of others. I'm not sure why I found this so difficult. I guess because I'm not like the other kids. They are religious. They're mostly puffy boys who wear baggy wool pants and prayer shawls under their white shirts. I'm an outsider with bright red hair and clothes from Harry's on East Broadway and shirts from Orchard Street. Most don't even follow any sports. I just can't get used to this. I try to fire back. I always hated green peas, which is probably why I started calling him Green Pea, hoping to upset him, but he found it funny. How do you win when the opposition is not offended? I'm good at arguments, but Green Pea is a pro. Compared to him, I am Bush League. When I make fun of his hair, his acne, his awkward walk, none of it sticks. Sure, I have acne, he says. So what? It will go away and you will still have that ridiculous hair. In West Hempstead, things are clearer. You tease me enough, you hit my brother, you will wind up fighting me sooner or later. Nothing with Green Pea has worked. In the last few days, I watched for my opportunity. That day is now. A dreadfully hot day in the stinking locker room, where he is changing slowly and no one else is here. Ah, Green Pea, I say, coming closer. We are alone. He barely glances at me and continues with his socks and shoes. We are alone now, I repeat, and it is time to end what was started. He lifts his befuddled face. What? He asks guardedly. To finish, Green Pea. Finish what? He asks, his voice quivering slightly. You make fun of me and tease me, and we will finish it. I don't understand, he says. We will fight. Fight, he repeats. Why? Because you keep doing it. Why fight, he asks, as his lips and cheeks tremble with fear. I've seen this many times. When the opposition is frightened before you begin, it makes it much easier to win. This is what you do, I say firmly. You fight, and someone wins and someone loses. No, no, he cries, I was just joking. It's not a joke when you make fun of people. It's what I do, he pleads. I do this with everyone. I don't mean anything. It is nasty and you wouldn't stop. And you call me Green Pea, it's the same. It's not the same, and I won't argue about it. Stand up and we will have a fight, Greenberg. I almost say Green Pea. His whole body is shaking now. And he says, I'll never do this again, never. It's too late. It won't happen again, I promise. Let's go over there, I point behind me. There's more room. But I don't fight, he pleads. What do you mean? I never fought, I never fight. I just say things, that's all. I don't mean harm. I didn't know. Too late. I'm sorry, it will never happen again. Good, then we will have one fight there and it's over. No, I won't fight. You want to hit me? I won't fight back. I look more carefully at Greenberg now. The red acne spots, a large new open one on his chin. His hair is hanging in tangles over his ears. I've never encountered anyone like him. Boys fight. The idea is never to have to do it twice. You have to win convincingly. The older they are, the more humiliated when they lose. Once I fight them, they stay away from Stephen and me. It is how things are ended. Perhaps I will hit him really hard just on his shoulder, and he will never forget. He is slumping further down on the bench. Then he stares up right into my eyes, and I feel really uncomfortable. I turn and walk out.
Thank you. So the book starts actually with your mother driving you to yeshiva for the first time. I think you were trying out, or you were being interviewed almost.
Yeah, the book opens up. We're in her 51 Dodge Wayfarer without air conditioning. It's a hot day, and we're driving to Queens, where I'm going to get tutored. So I have to be tutored before they'll accept me, and I don't want to be accepted, but I have to go for tutoring. So we go twice a week, and she's a chain smoker, and I'm choking in the next seat, and we're off to my Hebrew lesson.
And you also talk about how, and you mentioned this, your family wasn't religious, but I think it was your father who wanted you to go to a yeshiva. Do you know why?
Well, he never said. That was quite like him. He was a very quiet guy. In the store, he was very good at what he did in his textile store, but otherwise, he was quiet. But I had a hint, and I say this in the book. I always tagged along with him when he went to synagogue on Saturdays, and he would talk the whole time with his friend. And I could see that he had learned that one of his friends, whose son was in high school, couldn't get into any decent college. And another one dropped out of college. I think my father's brain was going around, I don't think this is going to work. And why he got this idea for yeshiva was, something was happening. Maybe we were somehow going to lose our Judaism. So we had no choice.
And, as you said also, throughout the book, through the 2 years, and I assume past that, you fought a lot with other boys. But at the end, and I'm not giving anything away, you say not everyone is the enemy. How did you make that arc?
Oh, that's really right at the end of the book.
Very end of the book.
And I'm really interested in this reading being in a library, because I'll segue slightly. The library saved me in many ways. I was a voracious reader, and once I was out of the house from a really young age, nobody knew where I went. I was off, and by the time I was 5, I was going to the next town where they had a good library. We only had a minuscule annex in West Hempstead. So I went to Hempstead, and this librarian, Mrs. Mahoney, took me under her wing. And nobody knew about this. Every week she saved 2 books for me. And I would go back, I'd turn them in, I'd get 2 more books. And most of the time, she kind of figured out what I liked. One time I said, not those Bronte books, but, it was, and at the end of the book, I come back to one of the books that was very important to me as a kid, The Red Badge of Courage. And, I had wondered, given my existence, what is it that makes a hero? In the beginning of The Red Badge of Courage, Henry runs away when the Union soldiers are all getting killed, and he wishes at one point he was wounded so he would have a red badge of courage. But in the end, he goes back into battle, and he carries this flag and goes right at the enemy. I wondered, is that smart? And, it was part of my growing up and coming of age and realizing not everybody is the enemy.
Kind of on that same line, the other book that you mention a lot in your biography is The Old Man and the Sea. Can you tell us what impact that had on your life?
Probably it was, for me, the most important book. I mean, I loved it. It was this very short book, of course, that Hemingway wrote. And the idea that an old destitute fisherman went out there and he catches a marlin and he can't let go. And by the time he comes back in, he's just there with this huge skeleton. Just the idea that, courage was something internal. No one was going to give him credit for it. It's just simply something that he had to do. So that's something I really understood.
Honestly, as a librarian, that was like the best explanation of Old Man and the Sea I've ever heard. So the whole, throughout the book, it was really great. So I appreciate that. And I think that shows actually in how you defended your brother, throughout your life.
I want to say in writing this book, because we're talking about the Old Man and the Sea, and how much I loved it. The editor of this press, she was a marvel. I didn't fact check myself. I mean, I should have, right? But she did, and I got the best fact checker on the planet. And she said, you don't say in the book every day where you are, but there's a day I think you're at October 30th, 1954. And you say, oh my God, Ernest Hemingway won the Nobel Prize today, and he's particularly cited for The Old Man and the Sea. And she said, but it wasn't announced till November 1st. I think you're 2 days off. I said, I wasn't.
So your brother also was someone that you defended, and you showed a lot of courage and got in a lot of fights because you defended him. Can you talk a little bit about your brother and your relationship with him?
Oh, that's tough. Stephen was this kid who was so slight. He was to keep growing past the age of 18. He got larger than me, but it took him a lot of time. And he was a kid who was very frightened. And we learned some of the extraordinary fright came from some of the abuse going on at our home, which was hidden from everybody. But I guess I knew in an unusual way. I was 3.5 years older, and the day he came from the hospital to our home, he was put on the kitchen table, he was in this blue blanket. I just assumed I had to protect him. And I knew how bright he was. He was out there building these crazy things in the garage and trying to make radios work that I never had any interest in. So I would be the purveyor of his wood and nails, and I'd get him all his stuff. And by the time he was 7, 8, I was buying him electronic magazines. Later in life, he was to become one of the great scientists in this country.
And you talk about him in your acknowledgments, and your acknowledgments were also really, well thought out. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
There are a lot of other tough issues that you talk about, including some of the abuse. And there are two particular scenes that stood out to me. One, when you stood between your mother and your grandmother, and the other one towards the end of the book, when your mother has the pool cue that your uncle had given you. Did you ever reconcile with your mother, that history?
Well, what Adam is talking about is, here I'm a tough kid. Doesn't take hardly anything for me to get in a street fight. It became my life. And when I got to yeshiva, I couldn't understand, nobody's fighting. And what nobody knew outside the house is, my mother, who was a brilliant woman, would become explosive. And she beat the hell out of me since before the age of 2. And the one time she went after my brother, I intervened. And a person really close to me was her father, my grandpa Max. It was a huge loss. He died before this book begins when I was 5. And then I became close with my grandma Katie. And she was really a peasant. She'd come here as a young girl, never was really educated, and I really, really liked her. I thought she was funny as hell. And we had a good time, but I think my mother was disdainful of how much of a peasant her own mother was. And my grandmother would come over every few months to cook, and one time we're in the kitchen. This time I thought my mother was going after her, and I stopped her.
Mm-hmm. It was a very powerful scene, very powerful. You also talked a lot about your dad, who, as you mentioned, came from the Ukraine. He lived, I believe, with his stepmother when his father came to the U.S.?
He came from a town that's now in southwest Ukraine. It was in Poland during the war. It got pushed back over the border. And it was a rabidly anti-Semitic community. And his mother died when he was 3 months old. His father remarried immediately and left when my dad was 2. So my dad didn't see him again until he came to the U.S. when he was almost 16. And then his father died shortly after, but his stepmother was the bad Cinderella story. I mean, my dad really had a hard time. But I knew his stepmother until she died. And he never talked about his childhood. I mean, it was obviously what he had seen. He got out was, I understood somehow, was unlike anything I was going through.
And I think, and I hope you can talk to us about this, that I think the scene that best describes his character, one of the scenes, is when his store got held up. Can you talk a little bit about that? It was kind of funny, but it was also kind of scary.
Well, I worked in the store as often as possible. I loved it. You know, I talked him into it when I was 5, and he took me on a Sunday. I went down to the basement. I started packing away pillowcases and then sheets. It seemed easy, you know, color to color. I mean, what was hard? And, but I worked there as many summers as I could, and almost every Sunday until I couldn't stand that yeshiva was also Sundays. So, and that's where I got to know my father. And on the way to the store, oh my God, he knew everything about politics, and he'd be yelling at the windshield and complaining about Eisenhower, and then of course the McCarthy hearings. So I got all of it. And we're in the store, and it's just a freezing winter Sunday. And we close up at 6 o'clock. I'm in this little crappy office in the back. And somebody comes in, some white guy in his late 20s. And I'm 11, I'm a tough kid. The guy comes in, I said, "We closed, you gotta leave." And he says to me, "Get in the back." I said, "Listen, you better leave, we're closed." He says, "I'm telling you, kid, you better get in the back now." And I said, "Well, I'm telling you, you better leave." He puts his hand in a paper bag and he pulls out a gun. And I stupidly say, "Well, why didn't you say that sooner?" And then I'm in the back, and there's my father and his partner, his older brother, and 2 other guys that worked there. And now there's 3 guys, all without masks, and I say to my father, "Open the safe." And my father's telling me, "Well, you're really stupid. You didn't case this place. The boss left an hour ago. We can't open the safe." He puts a gun against one of the guy's heads. My dad won't open the safe. And my Uncle Ira just opens it up. And then I have to tie everybody up in the basement. And this guy is saying, "You can't leave for 15 minutes. And my father's out like that. And he runs upstairs. And I know what's going to happen. And of course, later on, the cops come. And he had chased these guys. He had chased them 3 blocks until they ducked into a subway. when you kill somebody in the Gestapo, they're going to wipe out the town. So that's the price you pay. And then there are people like your dad and other people who just help him. And, you know, I end the chapter saying, no one's going to know he's a hero, but he's a real hero.
There are other lessons that you kind of impart on the reader, specifically in some of your classes in the yeshiva, and one of them is you challenge one of the rabbis when he's teaching you Jewish law. Can you talk to us about that? That was a particularly interesting scene.
Well, I really cut a lot of classes, and I'm amazed even today, no one, either they didn't care, and they decided not to throw me out. I mean, the principal really liked me, took me under his wing, but I couldn't stand this Talmud teacher. And I cut most of his classes. And then I came back one time, and he was teaching something and had an idea. And I thought, I having a Talmudic question, I think I can stump him. If I can ask him a question, he can't answer.
Can you say what the Talmud is for those who may not know?
Well, yeah, I should. So, the Talmud is the original books of Jewish law. And it began, I think, about 500 BC in Babylonia. And the reason it's originally in Aramaic is that's what the Jews used in Babylonia. So it was an oral law for a few hundred years, and then it began to be transcribed over the next hundreds of years, and it's 63 large volumes. And I was told entering the school by the principal, I went to the first class and he called me in and he said, what did you learn today? I said, a lot about cows breaking fences, you know, but anyway,
There's a whole chapter on that, by the way.
called Cows and Fences. Because I learned early on, it's really not about learning ancient law at its best. It was learning humanity, trying to find your way to fairness at its best. But this Talmud teacher really pissed me off. He had done a couple of things. So I came back in and I came up with this question that, okay, this is a law you can't break. Okay, like one everybody knows, like kosher food is a law you can't break. Violating the Sabbath you can't break. So there's laws about vows. When you absolutely give a vow, you can't break. And then there's laws about charity. So I come up with a complex question that the people in the middle had to violate one law or the other. There was no way out. And he stops cold. First of all, he wasn't going to call on me, but then he stops cold. I think, he says, I'm going to the principal. I think, that's it. They're finally going to throw me out. That's it. I'm out of here. And the principal, Charney, comes in, who, I mean, he really cared about me. And he says, repeat it. And I repeat it. And he goes, you know, he says, I like this. And I said, why? Just trying to trick him. And he went back to the rabbinic assembly to see if they could solve my question. And he came back and he had a whole assembly because they couldn't solve my question. And I think these Jews have things upside down. I ask them a question to make trouble, and I stump them. They have an assembly because they didn't have an answer.
It's pretty clever.
I was just trying to be bad.
You also write about your experiences with anti-Semitism. And in fact, and we haven't talked about this, but it's probably worth mentioning, the title of your book came from an experience as a Boy Scout. Can you tell us where Onelegged Mongoose came from?
So, Onelegged Mongoose I'm happy about the title because the book came out just a couple months ago, and after it came out, somebody said, you know, if you Google it, no one has ever used that title before, so they're going to get your book. And I thought, well, that's cool, but it's real in terms of my history. There's a chapter later in the book called Onelegged Mongoose, and I'm now in the second year of Yeshiva Central Queens, mostly getting used to it. And I find, you know, friends there. Some of the kids are really bright. There's a different kind of camaraderie that has begun that's important. And my mother decides I should join the Boy Scouts. Like, what? You know, I'm commuting 24 hours a week. So I got to go to Hempstead, and I get there, and it was not going to be a good thing right away, but in order to get your first badges, you have to go on a weekend camping trip. That's what you have to do. So a couple weeks later, we go out to a park all the way out in Islip, Long Island, and it's freezing. Now we get there, and I can't pitch a tent. I don't know what the hell these knots are all about, why anybody cares about knots. And then we finally have the campfire and the food. I had Scoutmaster, and right before this chapter, during the day after we set up the tents, I really encountered an ugly anti-Semitic episode with one of the three leaders. I mean, it was nasty. So I already hated the place. And now, the second chapter, Onelegged Mongoose, we're at this camp. And the Scoutmaster says, well, boys, we're really lucky we got to come here this weekend because Heckscher State Park has been closed for years because a one-legged mongoose has roamed the park, half man, half mongoose, and it killed people. But since no one has seen it in 6 years, we're probably okay. And with that, one kid peed in his pants, and I'm thinking, you know, I don't believe a word of this, but, and then finally, I mean, he says, but we're Boy Scouts. Why don't we go out and be sure and look for the one-legged mongoose? And every kid is shaking. And I wind up with the guy who really gave me a hard time that day. And there are 4 of us, and we go in one direction, and we get to this trail, and he said, well, who wants to volunteer to go all the way down the Ramapo Trail to see if they could find the mongoose?
And it's funny, but you also were told you don't belong here, literally.
I was told, you don't belong here, this is never going to be for you. And that's before the mongoose episode.
How old were you?
At that moment, I was 11.
Well, and actually, kudos to you for writing for 2 years of your life from age 10 to 12. My story would be, I got my tonsils out, I became a Cub Scout, and that's about it. So, I mean, this book, it was really, really impactful, and the stories are fantastic. You talk about, in that period, you contracted polio, you were hit by a gray Studebaker.
Gray Studebaker.
And had a serious incident involving your eye, which I won't, you'll have to read because I'm not going to describe it. Yeah. How you doing?
Okay.
Great.
Trying to avoid this plague now. Anyway, you know, I even wrote a piece about COVID, a couple pieces, because when I was a kid, what families were horribly afraid of was polio. And I was right before the Salk vaccine. And in fact, they had had a trial, and imagine if this happened today, there were 200 deaths that you don't hear about. And so it got withdrawn. And it was a hot summer, and I was upstairs, and I went to walk down the steps to the kitchen. I couldn't make it, I couldn't walk. And then I had to go through trying to figure out with a neurologist whether I had polio, but of course I had it. You know, they didn't have an assay back then. It was a diagnosis by exclusion. And I had seen a girl down the street pulled out into an eye and lung who died. So everybody knew about it, and a lot of families were trying to run off to the Catskills to avoid it. But I got it, and I mean, the treatment was primitive that I got. Whether it helped or not, I don't know. But I couldn't walk, and I was in bed for 2 full months, and I was beginning to recover. And then my parents make a decision. We were supposed to start Hebrew camp, another one of these things. But I missed the first 6 weeks, and they decided I'm getting a little better. I should go to the last 2 weeks. But, you know, then the story is not so long after I was really hit badly by a car. I mean, really hit. And I was unconscious. I mean, I saw the whole thing in slow motion. And when I woke up, about 15 minutes later, I'm on the side of the road, and my grandma's there, and she's crying, my sister's hysterical. And there's a whole crowd of people. It'd been a hit and run. And this guy's leaning over me, he's trying to talk to me, and I had wiggled my toes and my fingers. I figured, I'm gonna make it.
Mm-hmm. And you did.
Apparently.
I want to ask you to read one of the poems. You're also a published poet, and while you're getting to that page, I just want to remind everyone, Pyramid Books is right here. They are a local bookstore who's been an awesome supporter of the library for years now. And you can purchase a copy of this book today and have Dr. Straus sign it. So I want to encourage everyone to do that after our Q&A. But before we get to that, this poem is about your grandmother.
Grandma Katie was a character, and I was crazy about her. And we had a lot of discussion in this book whether I'd incorporate some of my poems, and eventually we did. And the publisher had a final decision whether she thought they fit. But this poem does go back to a moment I was 2 years old. And we were still living in Borough Park in Brooklyn, and my grandmother was a block and a half away, and I'd sneak over to her house. And I'd cross the street, I had a tricycle, and she didn't give me up. And one time I took the tricycle to she was on the 2nd floor, and I took my tricycle to the top of the stairwell, and then I opened the front door, and I decided if I ride down the stairs with my trike, it would be really cool. I could get out faster. Didn't quite work. So this is called Grandma Katie. The sky, a July coconut haze. The blue and white enamel sign, 49th Street and 14th Avenue. The 2-family brick house, one in from the northeast corner, is a small religious school now. Its concrete stoop, 4 steps, I would have guessed 6, is painted over yellow too many times, and the chink in the balustrade to the left, against which I fell, is sanded smooth. My memory is frozen into still frames. In one, I hesitate at the top step on my new red tricycle. In another, a cold rag is wrapped around my wrist. A pea-green cotton house dress with small white flowers billows like a tent. Steam lifts off the clear soup, filling a broad maroon bowl, a thin stick of celery, 2 carrot chips, a chicken foot with puckered skin, and 3 large toes.
Thank you very much. What questions do you all have for Dr. Straus?
Just curious, have you seen green tea since that incident?
No, but I did have a kind of thought-provoking incident a couple weeks ago. For the most part, it was very important to me to write the book exactly as I remembered it. And in writing it, I was completely back in that place with a complete memory. And I kept the names. 1 or 2 people I couldn't remember exactly. The rest are all correct. And then I get an email and another email from a woman who knew my brother in Yeshiva Central Queens, knew him later in Yeshiva Flatbush, and knew him when he started as a scientist at the National Institutes of Health. And she said, "Oh my God, Stephen is just as you portrayed him in Yeshiva Central Queens. I knew him." And then she said, "But you know, Spilkowitz." And, oh my God. Well, when I arrived at Camp Mossad, all Jewish camp, and it's 2 weeks to go before we're going to leave. Stephen's already there 6 weeks and apparently liking it. And I come in this bunk, and that night, one of the kids is bullied so badly my stomach turned. And there was a really heavy kid from St. Louis, and another kid who was tall and skinny, kept calling him Freddie the Pig, but tormented him. And the kid who was the tormentor's last name, if anybody knows him, is Spilkowitz. So this woman wrote to me, "Well, he was in my synagogue as an adult." I said, "Oh shit, he's probably going to read this book." But it is what it is. Hopefully he's a good guy now.
Yes.
What was your path into medicine? How did that all occur?
Yeah.
What led you into medicine?
To medicine?
Yeah, your path.
Well, I even kind of knew as a kid, and my brother knew, that if my dad would have any say in what we did, back then, his boys would be doctors. There was no real second choice. And I thought, that was really that immigrant mentality. And I thought, okay, I'm never going to do it. And I was sure I would never be a doctor, so much for what I knew. And I went to college not as a science major. Back then, if you want to be pre-med, you were a science major. But somehow, they let me take all the pre-med courses. And then I applied to medical school a year early, just in case they took me a year early. And then I got in and think, okay, I'll try it out. And I backed my way into it, but became an oncologist, which was really a calling that I'm fortunate I spent most of my life doing.
Yes.
Well, we feel that we're living parallel lives with you.
We're from Borough Park,
And we
too.
lived on 49th Street.
49th and what?
I was on 9th and he was on
15th and 40th. But my parents lived right across from Temple Emmanuel.
Oh my God.
But in addition to that, we think
My name is Charney.
we're related to...
Charney?
Yes, Principal
With
Charney.
EY and your
Yes.
relative?
Yes. So we
Who
think
didn't see this happening?
we're related to your principal, we don't know. And of course, my grandmother lived on the Lower East Side, and I spent half my life there,
Well-
around Main Street.
In my book, Rabbi Charney is a quiet hero. And he clearly had an affection for me. And one of the things I didn't say in the book, I started going to his apartment, he and his wife, many weekends where he would study Talmud with me. And I never told anybody. I mean, the man was brilliant. But he calls me into his office just a few weeks into starting school. We were in an annex, a really crappy place. And he calls me into his office and he says, "You're not wearing tzitzis." I said, "What is that?" He says, "Well, it's like a tallis that you wear under your shirt. And here you do that, you wear tzitzis." And I'm thinking, how's anybody going to know? No, see, he said, "Here's what's going to happen. I don't care whether you do or don't wear tzitzis, but the teacher's going to find out. And he's going to kick you out, and where are you going to get? You're going to have to come in here. And then you're not going to wear tzitzis. Instead of talking about interesting things, we're going to have to talk about you getting tzitzis. So maybe there's a place on Essex Street on the Lower East Side, and it's really thin, and it won't bother you." That's kind of how he handled me. And maybe if he was anybody else, I wouldn't have made it. I literally didn't go to half the classes. And my grandmother, we lived on 15th and 50th, our apartment building, which we moved from when I was 3, but my older sister Miriam, who's a character in this book, when I was 2, I couldn't reach the handle to open to get in. It was really heavy. I'd get kicked out at 9 o'clock. I'd spend the whole day till 12:15 out on the streets. Then I need somebody to open the door for me. What a weird childhood. And if my sister didn't like anybody in her class, she was 3 years older, she said, "You got to hit this person, I don't like them." I didn't know what they did, I just hit them.
Yeah, just so many resonating comments. I grew up in Brownsville area, Sutter Avenue and Ralph Avenue, and I used to protect my brother, who was 2 years younger than me. And I won't use the derogative, term, but every time we'd go out of school, we would always be beaten up by a different ethnic group, if you know what I mean.
I got a really good chapter here that I was thinking I was going to read, and it's anthologized in a couple places already. And it's called Sugar Ray, and I just want to tell you about it for a minute, because, yeah, of course I know what you're talking about. So I'm in this yeshiva, and I'm finding my way back up to 5th grade in a hurry in Hebrew. But then, at noon, I got to go to the annex, and it's an hour and 15 minutes till English starts. So I take the subway, or I walk, it's 2.5 miles. So one day I'm bored of going on Jamaica Avenue under the L. I figured I'm going to go another route. So we go a parallel street at Atlantic Avenue. I'm on this avenue, and oh my God, the neighborhood changed in 1 block, and the stores are broken, and people are drunk up against the buildings. Most of the way up the block, the end of the block, and 4 black kids, about 2 years older than me, and they see me come, and I think, okay, and now I realize, oh boy, and the chapter's called Sugar Ray because there was no running, and now what I was going to do. And the outcome really is quite nice. I formed a relationship. It's better than the story. I formed a relationship with the big kid. First they want to beat me up. And he says, "Well, white bread, we're going to beat your ass up." And I say, you're a big kid, and you need 4 people to fight me? Why don't you fight me one-on-one? And that's how you got to separate them. And I said, "I'll beat you up." And then something happens where I see they're holding a handball. I said, "You play handball?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "I'll beat you in handball." So he wants to bet me $2. So now I don't have $2 with me, but now at the end of the chapter, he says, come on, Mr. Mark, let's see who's going to win in handball. And later what happened, because I cut so many classes, he and I were partners out there. No one could beat us. And it was funny. This tall, big, black kid played the right back. Little white kid up front. Everybody's laughing, and they all lost.
Yeah. The other comment I wanted to make was, I knew your brother, so I'm a scientist also, and we interact, and great man, really appreciate.
You knew Stephen?
Yes, of course.
Right.
Yeah, I used to consult for NIH all the time.
Tell me your name.
Oh, my name is Ronald Luftig. I worked on HIV protease inhibitors.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I
of
go
course.
up, Bob Gallo and I interacted a great deal.
Oh, my. Well, thank you.
Yeah, what a great man. I mean, the
Steve-
alternative theory, I mean, that institute to me was something that was just the right thing and at the right time. And he did a great job.
Thank you, really, thank you. Stephen, one of the most thoughtful people, kindest people I ever knew in my life. Sometimes he drive me crazy till he made a decision. He published his first paper with me, and he drove me crazy how many drafts he wanted to listen, I'm on already. But he never let up, and he was really an extraordinary scientist. And when he's 58, I got one of the worst colds in my life. He called me up. I was the first one he spoke to. He took an MRI of his head, and he told me what they saw. And he knew and I knew he was going to die. And I was involved in his care. And he was taking care of it at NIH. But no one was allowed to tell him the results of the new scan until I came down and heard it first.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful.
Great man.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Again, I encourage you all to support a local business, Pyramid Books, and the library. Please purchase one of Dr. Straus's books, and he'll be right over here signing them. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.